Welcome to another Ask GMBN Tech. This is our weekly Q&A session where hopefully I'll get to answer some of the questions you guys have about your mountain bikes. So if you want to get your questions in, add them in the comments below this very video, or you can email them in. Use the hashtag AskGMBNTech and email them to the email address on the screen right now. First up is a question from Jackson Barger. What do you recommend, the new baseline GoPro or the Hero 5 Black? I'm not sure what to get and I can't tell very many major differences. No, you're right. So they both have essentially the same sort of shell on them. They both would serve you very well, but you have to, I think, consider what you want out of it and what you might want to do with it next. So for basic videoing, if it's for Facebook, Instagram, your general social media stuff, then the baseline one is absolutely fine. But if you look on screen now, it's a bit of a chart just to break down some of those major differences. I'm just going to run you through those. So of course, pricing, $199 versus $299, $100 in it. So you could buy some other stuff for your bike or save up for some cool mounts and stuff for your GoPro with that money. So still images. So with both of those GoPros, you can take some really nice still images, thanks to the fact they've both got screens on the back, really nice to use. So it's a 10 megapixel versus 12 megapixels. And it's on the 10 megapixel camera of the Hero, it's 10 frames per second on burst mode, whereas it's 30 frames a second on the HD5. So 30 frames a second is an awful lot and you're definitely going to capture an image, but I just want to make you aware that even pro DSLR cameras like the Canon 1DX and 5D and the 7D and that, they're not really going to top out more than about 10 frames a second, so you don't actually need more than that. Max video size, of course, I've just said it's 1080p at 60 frames a second on the Hero, and you can obviously lower that to 720 pixels and you'll be able to film at a higher frame rate, say 120 frames a second, if you wanted to do some cool slow motion and stuff. And of course, 720 is still technically sort of HD ready, so when you're posting that online on your social channels, it's still going to look like really good footage. On the Hero 5, it's 4K at 30 frames a second, so that's substantially more. However, it will also do 1080p at 120 and a whole bunch of other settings. So just think about that. Have you got a posh 4K telly at home? If so, then maybe you want that slightly better GoPro. If not, it's probably not going to give you much more, and it's just, if you accidentally recorded in those higher settings, you're just going to end up with enormous files that your computer's going to struggle with when you later on edit that footage. Of course, they're both waterproof, they've both got voice control, they've both got touchscreen. Now the Hero hasn't got Pro Tune, whereas the Hero 5 has got Pro Tune. Basically, in the world of still cameras, there's a feature called RAW or JPEGs. So JPEGs are a compressed image. RAW is an uncompressed image and it's not altered in any state. So it's very flat. It's designed for processing afterwards. And this is the sort of video equivalent by GoPro. It's called Pro Tune. So very useful if you want to do a load of effects or making the images look better later. If you're just taking really cool content and you're going to upload it via their quick software or straight to your Facebook, forget it. You don't need it. It hasn't got GPS on it, unfortunately, on the cheaper one, and it's not compatible with the Karma. Of course, they both have the sort of in-body stabilization built into them, so you don't actually have to have that extra expensive stuff. You're going to get great footage with the regular Hero. Now, one final thing, if you're into vlogging or anything like that, you might want to consider the fact that the regular one doesn't have an audio in, so that means you can't use an external mic, whereas the 5 does. The built-in microphones are quite good, and they do have a wind protection mode, but it's not quite the same for when you're just sort of interviewing someone or things like that. So just take that into consideration. But answer to your question, if you're saving $100, go for the Hero. It's absolutely great little camera. Next up is a tyre related question from Jan Mills. You were saying about swapping tyres around on the bike. My bike came with a 2.4 on the front and a 2.3 on the rear. I've been told it's okay to run two 2.4s in the summer and put the 2.3 on the rear for winter. Is that right? Yeah, completely. I mean, quite a lot of people go for slimmer tyres in the winter, front and back, not just on the back. Now, so it does kind of depend on the type of mud you have. I know that sounds a bit funny saying that, but some muds are really, really thick, congealed stuff, and that's the sort of stuff you want to cut through it. So a fatter tyre, anything up to like a plus size tyre, will actually glide around on top of the mud rather than cutting through it. And what you're looking to achieve is to cut through to firmer ground and get that traction. So you simply can't get traction on mud that's thick like that, unless of course you go to whole hog and go for a fat bike, in which case it's more like a tractor effect where you've got this huge tyre, a huge amount of sort of footprint on on the mud surface itself. If you look at cyclocross bikes, they're astonishing in the mud. You look like you can have no traction, but they just cut through so well and you have so much grip. So I would say even consider having some thinner tyres if your conditions do have that sort of mud for winter use. If not, if you're sort of the mud you have is a thinner, runnier mud, it doesn't really make too much difference because you get to cut through that anyway. And by all means, experiment with it. It is good fun, and don't be put off by the mud because it's great fun to ride in. Okay, next up is from Philip. Great show. Thanks for making tech things clearer to us. I could do some suggestions. I've got a Canyon Neuron AL 7.9 2017 model in a size XL. I'm a tall guy, 190 centimeters. The bike's default setup has a 70mm stem and a 720mm bar. I wonder if changing it to a 50mm stem and a 780 bar with a 20mm rise would make a difference to me. I'm riding single track, uphill and downhill in the mountains, but nothing really extreme. I just wonder what your opinion is on this. Is it worth trying, or better to just stick with the default setup and maybe get a proper enduro bike someday in the future? Okay, so by that comment, do I assume that you want to make it a little bit more aggressive to ride? Because if so, then yes, that would be a good way of doing it. But perhaps jumping from a 70 back to 50 might be a bit extreme. Now, I have mentioned in the past that if you go for a slightly shorter stem, if you want to sort of keep that sort of effective length of the bike, some workarounds are things like having a slightly wider bar. Now, in your case, I mean, that is quite a big bike, that XL. 70mm stem obviously is quite long, so perhaps going for a 60mm stem might give you the best of both worlds. You're not really going to ruin any of the handling that you've got, but you might get a slightly more aggressive feel from the bike. Now, a 720mm bar by no means is a narrow bar, but by jumping up from the 720mm bar to a 780, yeah, by all means you're going to get a slightly stronger stance on that bike, and it might feel great for you. If I was you, I think the best way to do this, instead of just laying out some money, is if to see any of your friends or any riding buddies have got a similar setup, maybe a 60 or a 50mm stem, you could try that for effect. And the same with the longer bar, because you don't always want to have to commit to just buying these things and then finding out you don't like it. Alternatively, if you did jump up for a wider bar and you sold, let's just say, your 720mm bar, and you didn't like the wider bar, you can always just start trimming it back down again. Of course, you might see that as a waste of money for buying it in the first place, but as one of the advantages of an aluminium bar is you can trim it down to suit your preferred size. But definitely see if you can try some friends' bars and stems before you commit to it, because then you'll find out what does suit you. But I would be keen on not necessarily going for the 50 and maybe a 60mm if you're going to do it. Next up, from Matthias Zeller. Hey Doddy and crew, my name is Matthias. My body is 40 years of age, but my mind only grew up to staying 12 years old. Now, I kind of think you're fairly similar to a lot of us here. I think mountain biking definitely keeps you on the younger side of things. I'm 5'9" and at 90 kilos, a bit on the fatter side. I've been building my own and friends' bikes out of scrap and outdated parts for 20 years now. I could show you some uninteresting retro pics, but I don't want to bore anyone. I don't mind seeing them. Fire them in. I'd like to see them. At the moment, I'm researching the new best bike I can. I've already tried the propane tyre, hell of a bike. The all-mountain version, basically slightly reduced travel front and rear, seems to fit better than the more sluggish feeling enduro. Yeah, by all means, that sounds like a great bike, and I know exactly what you mean. I perhaps wouldn't say sluggish for the enduro, but to get the enduro to feel the same way as the all-mountain, you've got to really push them that bit harder. But of course, they are focused on a more aggressive style riding. So now I've got some decisions to make. Is it worth 400 grams in weight to get wheels with an inner width of 30mm instead of 25mm? Some manufacturers make them similar price. Basically, at a total weight of just over 100 kilos, I don't know if this stuff's going to last. Okay, so firstly, let's deal just with your weight, right? So there's no issue with the 25mm internal rim width of your weight. You're not going to create any more damage as you would with a 30 just by the rim width. Okay, so it's all down to the strength of the wheel in its totality, not just an individual component. If a really strong rim is laced up poorly, it's still going to be a weak wheel. So it has to be a well-built wheel. Now, one of the advantages you're going to have with going for a slightly wider internal rim width is you're going to have more tyre support. So if you choose to run, let's say, slightly lower tyre pressures to get maximum grip, it's going to support the sidewalls of the tyre more. So let's just say this is your tyre profile with a thinner rim. The tyre is going to be like this sort of shape. When you push into a turn, it's more likely to squirm around. Whereas when you've got a wider base, it's going to squirm a lot less because the tyre sidewalls have that support. So if that sounds like you, then that's a great thing to do, especially on the back wheel where more of your weight is going to push into the back of that bike. So I would say that is quite a good thing to do. And 400 grams, yeah, of all the places on the bike to notice it, you will notice it there. But good, strong, stiff wheels with a wide stance on the tyres do make a big difference for the heavier guys out there, definitely. And I wouldn't worry too much about that extra weight because you can get slightly lighter tyres and have the benefit of having a wider rim stance to hold them in a good position. But at the same time, you can go too stiff. I've ridden some wheels before that have been almost painfully stiff. They transmit that shock and vibration straight through the bike. So there is an element of sometimes having a wheel with a bit more flex is actually a good thing. On my Nuke Proof, it's got Mavic XA Elite wheels on there. And they're by no means the stiffest wheels out there, but they're really comfortable because they do have slight flex to them. Just consider that. Don't go too stiff and don't be drawn in too much by those incredibly strong, overbuilt, super wide rims because they can make your bike ride like a bit of a mess. Your second question, I've never broken a rim or destroyed a fork. Should I invest in cheaper wheels, suspension and pretty much everything else so I can get a carbon frame? Difference in carbon and aluminium is 800 grams and close to €1,000. So let's just think about this with an aluminium frame. Take the carbon out of the equation for the moment. So the best place to lose weight on a bike isn't the frame, it's actually the wheels because that is your rotating mass. That is what you've got to turn around with every pedal revolution. That is the weight that you're turning. If you can lose weight on your wheels first, it's going to have more of an effect. Now I think you're better off with a cheaper frame and lighter wheels than you are vice versa. And I do think it's a bit of sacrilege almost if you went for this really high-end carbon frame and you're putting cheap parts on it because cheaper, heavier wheels that aren't going to roll as fast, they're not going to give you a nice impression of riding that bike. Because to ride a really nice high-end carbon frame, really to get the most out of it, you're going to have high-end lightweight wheels. Maybe carbon wheels, maybe alloy wheels, but they've got to be decent lightweight rolling resistance wheels. So just factor that in, you know. I would definitely stick to the normal frame. There's nothing wrong with aluminium. I love my aluminium frame. I've got a carbon frame as well. I think I like them equally, but for different reasons. Next up is a dropper post related question from Felicia Gonzalez. Are dropper posts safer than rigid? Is it a worthwhile upgrade for increased safety and a cross-country bicycle for downhills? Personally, I do think so, yes, because there are obvious things that you can do with a dropper post. You can lower your centre of gravity, so it means you haven't got that pendulum effect of being up high on the bike. You get your centre of gravity nice and low for when you're going down steep stuff. And it also means you're not going to get kicked up the back when you're going down the faster stuff, which you probably know on a cross-country bike or any bike with a rigid seat post. One of those dangers is riding a fast undulating section of terrain, and if you hit something hard, of course your arms and legs are the best suspension you can have. They can absorb some of that impact, but if you get kicked, the next thing that's going to happen is the saddle's going to kick you up the bum and it can kind of throw your weight a bit too far forwards, and all too often you can't quite recover from that and you'll end up on a bit of an endo and horribly sometimes going straight over the bar. So I'm a firm believer that you can stop that sort of phenomenon with a dropper post. But at the same time, by having a dropper post, you have to be able to ride intuitively with a dropper post. You have to learn to ride again. It sounds a bit strange, I'm sure, but actually it's harder than you think. So granted, these ones these days, you always have a bar-mounted sort of lever to actuate the dropper, but you have to consider where you're using them. If you can't anticipate the sort of moments out on the trail naturally, then they're probably not going to be that much of an advantage to you because you could just slow down and sort of deal with whatever terrain is in front of you. But if you are interested in riding a bit faster and really want to take a few chances, having a dropper post and being able to anticipate where you need to use it, that is the key to how you can use one to the maximum advantage. Two more things to note though. When the saddle is down, if you've been used to riding with a saddle between your legs most of the time at the sort of full extension height, it can be a bit off-putting because you might be used to sort of pinching the saddle between your legs for stability at speed, and suddenly when that saddle is squashed down all the way out the way, it's sort of near your knee height. You can still do it, but it's not the nicest feeling if you're not used to it, so it does take time to adjust. But let's also be clear about this, that a dropper post is no substitute for how well a rider can ride. They can definitely accentuate how well you can ride. Just look at some of the top XC pros out there that choose to not run dropper posts. It doesn't seem to slow them down. So it obviously has to work for you. But personally, based on a safety thing, then yes, I would definitely say riding with a dropper post can be safer. The last question is related to one of the bikes I ride actually, so it's from Luco the Great. Do you recommend the Nukeproof Scout 290 race that you were riding in Spain for a beginner mountain biker? Also, how does the slack geometry affect the bike's handling and climbing capabilities? Yeah, so the Scout is basically a great bike. So it's a hardtail frame, obviously. It's got quite a slack head angle on it, a 65-degree head angle. It's got boost 148 spacing out back and a 130mm travel fork on the front. So really good for all-round riding. And of course, that slack head angle is very confidence inspiring. Now, it's definitely not too slack for climbing, but actually the slack angles aren't the problem with climbing. It's actually the length of a bike that makes more of a problem. So when slacker head angles first started coming into sort of fashion on mountain bikes, quite often the bikes were too short. So if you're running a bike with a long stem and a slack head angle and you try and go uphill a steep climb on the bike, the front wheel is going to wander all over the place because it's just flopping around. Whereas on a bike with longer wheelbase and longer geometry, like a more progressive geometry bike like the Scout, you'll find that your weight's distributed really evenly between those two wheels. So at all times your front wheel's got a good amount of weight on it and therefore it doesn't really wander around. I think it's absolutely fine. The seat angle's steep enough on it that your saddle is nearer towards the bottom bracket than it is over the rear axle of the bike, so your position is great. And slamming the saddle on the frame turns it into almost a bit of a jump bike. Great fun bike to ride. So there you go, there's another Ask GMBN Tech Q&A session in the bag. If you've got any questions, add them in the comments below or fire them to the email address on the screen. And for a couple of really helpful MTB Tech related videos, click up top here for our XC Tech analysis video. That's where I take a look at all the sort of XC race bikes that the top pros were running at the first round of the XCO World Cup in Stellenbosch. And click down the bottom here to perfect your rear shifting. And it's all the little details in that video that show how gears can go out of indexing and where to start looking for those problems on your bike. As always, click on that globe to subscribe, share it around, tell your mates about it, and if you like the video, give us a thumbs up.